Hi, everybody. We've decided to go and put ourselves outside while it's dry to read you the very first chapter of The Letter for the King, A Mysterious Mission. The first chapter is called The Vigil in the Chapel. Theodore knelt on the stone floor of the chapel, staring at the pale flame of the candle in front of him. What time was it? He was supposed to be reflecting seriously upon the duties he would have to perform once he was a knight. But his mind kept wandering, and sometimes he found that he wasn't thinking about anything at all. He wondered if his friends felt the same. He glanced across at Foldo and Harman, at Wilmo and Josipo. Foldo and Wilmo were gazing at their candles, while Amen had buried his face in his hands. Josipo was kneeling with a straight back and staring up at the ceiling. But then he changed position and looked Theodore straight in the eyes. Theodore turned his head away and fixed his gaze on the candle again. What was Giuseppe thinking about? Wilmo moved, scraping his shoe on the floor. The others all looked in his direction. Wilmo hung his head and looked a little embarrassed. It's so quiet, thought Theodore. I've never known such quietness in my entire life. All I can hear is our breathing, and maybe, if I'll listen carefully, the beating of my own heart. The 5 young men were not permitted to say anything to one another, not even a word, all night long. They were also forbidden to have any contact at all with the outside world. They had locked the chapel door behind them, and they would not open it again until the next morning at 7 o'clock, when King Dagonar's knights would come to fetch them. Tomorrow morning. Theodore could already picture the celebratory procession, the knights on their magnificently carbonized horses, with their colorful shields and fluttering banners. He imagined himself among them, riding a fine steed, clad in shining armor, with a helmet and a waving plume. But then he shook his head to rid himself of that vision. He knew he should not be thinking about the external trappings of knighthood, but instead vowing to be chivalrous and honest and brave and true. The candlelight made his eyes hurt. He looked at the altar, where the 5 swords were waiting. The shields hung above the altar, gleaming in the flickering light of the candles. Tomorrow there will be 2 knights bearing the same coat of arms, thought Theodore, my father and myself. His father's name was also Theodore, and he was known as Theodore the Valiant. Was he lying awake now, thinking about his son? Theodore hoped he would become as worthy a knight as his father. Then another thought occurred to him. What if someone were to knock at the door? He and his companions would not be permitted to open it. Theodore remembered something that Sir Fontemar, whose squire he had been, had once told him. During his own vigil in the chapel, there had been a loud knocking at the door. Fontemar had been there with 3 other young men. None of them had opened up, and it was just as well, because they later discovered that it had been one of the king's servants who had wanted to put them to the test. Theodore looked again at his friends. They were still kneeling in the same position. He knew it must be after midnight already. His candle had almost burnt down. It was the shortest of the 5. Perhaps it was because he was sitting by the window. The chapel was a draughty place, and he could feel a chilly gust of air. When my candle goes out, he thought, I won't light another one. The others wouldn't be able to see him in the dark, which was kind of an appealing thought, and he wasn't worried that he might fall asleep. Had Wilmo dozed off? No, he had just shifted position, so he must be awake. I'm not spending my vigil as I should, thought Tiuri. He clasped his hands together and rested his eyes on his sword, which he would be allowed to use only for a just cause. He repeated to himself the words that he would have to speak to the king the following day. I swear as a knight to serve you loyally, as I will of your subjects, as I will all of your subjects, and those who call upon my aid. I promise to. And then he heard a knock at the door. It was quiet, but there could be no doubt. The 5 young men all heard it and held their breath, but they stayed exactly where they were. There was another knock. They looked at one another, but no one said one word or moved a muscle. The handle started turning and rattling, but of course the door was locked. And then they heard the sound of footsteps slowly moving away. All 5 of them sighed at the same time. Good, thought Tiuri. That's it over with. It was strange, but he felt as though all throughout his vigil he had been waiting for such an interruption. His heart was pounding so loudly in his chest that he was sure the others must be able to hear it. Come on, Tiuri, come on, calm down, he said to himself. It was just a stranger who didn't know about our vigil, or someone who wanted to disturb us to put us to a test. But still, Tiuri waited anxiously for another sound. His candle flared brightly and then went out with a quiet hiss, and he was surrounded by darkness. He had no idea how much more time had passed when he heard a quiet noise above his head. It sounded like someone was scratching at his window. And then he heard a voice as soft as a breath. In the name of God, open the door. What do you think, guys? Will he open the door? Or do you think he might stick with his vigil and continue as he should? We'll find out tomorrow. Now, this is live and this is going to be on the internet forever. Hey? Yes. Do you understand what that means? Yes. Whatever you've been doing there, it's going to be on the internet forever.
Why can't you delete it?
Because I've just been spending 5 minutes